At exactly 1:47 in the morning, the digital eyes of a suburban home go completely blind. 41 minutes later, at 2:28 in the morning, an even more sinister disconnection occurs. A smartphone application designed to monitor the rhythmic beating of a human heart through a pacemaker suddenly drops its signal. The patient relying on that critical medical device is an 84-year-old woman living alone who requires daily heart medication just to survive. The sudden digital silence is not a malfunction, but the beginning of a nightmare. The clock is immediately ticking for a vulnerable victim who vanished into the cold night, without a single physical witness to tell the tale. Who possesses the terrifying precision to systematically dismantle both the perimeter security of a residential property and the internal medical monitoring system of a human being in under 45 minutes? This level of calculated intrusion suggests an alleged perpetrator who has studied their target with obsessive detail. But the true horror of this case does not end with the chilling efficiency of the suspected kidnapper, because it extends to the very people sworn to protect the community. As the desperate search begins, a baffling and unprecedented decision by the local police department threatens to destroy the entire investigation. Why did the authorities make a catastrophic choice that almost helped the perpetrator erase every microscopic piece of evidence left behind at the crime scene? The system designed to catch predators completely collapsed in the crucial early hours. The clock is ticking for Nancy, and in this case, the systemic failures of local law enforcement might be just as dangerous as the faceless individual who took her in the dead of night. Every second matters when a life depends on medication, and every contaminated piece of evidence is a step closer to a permanent mystery. To track the raw evidence, the authorities tried to sweep under the rug, hit subscribe, and open the vault to crime files with Liam. Modern survival often creates a dangerous illusion of absolute security. For an 84-year-old woman living independently, the integration of smart home technology and advanced medical applications seems like the ultimate safety net. Her residence is fortified by motion sensors and a doorbell camera designed to capture any unwanted approach. Her very heartbeat is monitored by a digital tether, linking her pacemaker to a smartphone application. This architecture of surveillance provides profound peace of mind to her family, who believe that if anything goes wrong, the technology will sound the alarm instantly. But within this web of digital protection lies a single fatal anomaly. While the physical hardware is actively scanning the environment, the homeowner has not maintained an active subscription for cloud storage data. Retention. The camera can sense movement, and it can trigger a real-time alert, but it cannot save the video files into a permanent digital archive. Why does this specific technological oversight matter so deeply to the unfolding tragedy? Because it creates a blind spot that a sophisticated predator can easily exploit. Without a secure off-site backup, the security system transforms from a silent witness into a useless piece of plastic, the moment someone physically tampers with the hardware. The alleged perpetrator does not need to hack a complex encrypted server. They only need to reach the device and sever its connection before anyone checks the live feed. This subtle vulnerability explains exactly why a missing persons case rapidly escalates into a terrifying exhibition of calculated espionage. The predator knows they are completely invisible the second the local network is breached. The digital fortress is nothing more than a house of cards, waiting to be pushed over in the dark. On the evening of January 31st, the victim experiences a completely normal family dinner. Her son-in-law, Tommaso Cioni, drives her back to her quiet residence. At exactly 9:48 at night, she steps inside the perimeter of her home. 2 minutes later, at 9:50 at night, the heavy garage door closes firmly, shutting out the outside world. She is surrounded by the comforting glow of her smart devices and the steady rhythm of her monitored pacemaker. She believes she is entirely safe behind locked doors and electronic sensors. She is completely unaware that the very devices she trusts to protect her life are already counting down the final hours to her sudden disappearance. The family breathes a collective sigh of relief, knowing she is resting comfortably in her own bed. The neighborhood is quiet, and the security perimeter seems impenetrable. But true crime history teaches us that the most dangerous predators do not always break down the front door with brute force. Sometimes they slip through the microscopic cracks in our digital armor. They find the one subscription we forgot to renew, or the one cable left exposed to the elements. For an elderly woman relying on medication and a pacemaker, the margin between safety and catastrophe is razor thin. Her entire existence relies on an uninterrupted stream of electricity and data. When that delicate balance is disrupted, the consequences are immediate and severe. As she settles in for the night, the unseen alleged stalker is already preparing to strike. They understand the layout. They understand the technological blind spots, and they are fully prepared to plunge her secure world into total darkness. The illusion of safety is absolute until the moment the digital lights go out. The morning of February 1st begins with an eerie silence that slowly contorts into sheer panic. It is a Sunday, and like clockwork, the 84-year-old woman is expected to attend her virtual church service online. Her family relies on this routine as a daily proof of life. But when the clock strikes 12:03 in the afternoon and her digital presence is nowhere to be found, the initial worry quickly metastasizes into absolute dread. A missed church service might seem like a minor oversight for anyone else, but for an elderly woman with severe medical dependencies, it is a massive red flag. Her loved ones immediately dial 911, pleading with dispatchers to send officers to the residence for a welfare check. When local law enforcement arrives at the quiet suburban property, they are greeted by a deeply unsettling scene. The house is completely empty. There is no sign of a forced entry through the main living areas, but the atmosphere is heavy with an unspoken violence. As investigators carefully canvass the exterior of the home, their eyes lock on to a horrifying discovery near the front entrance. Spattered across the concrete porch are undeniable traces of human blood. The biological evidence is immediately collected and rushed for rapid testing. The results confirm the family's worst nightmare. The genetic material left on the cold porch belongs directly to Nancy Guthrie. The presence of her blood violently shatters any hopeful theory that she simply wandered off or suffered a sudden medical emergency while out for a walk. Blood on the porch indicates a physical confrontation. It suggests a violent struggle took place right at the threshold of her supposed sanctuary. The alleged attacker intercepted her or dragged her out, leaving behind the ultimate biological proof of a crime. Panic erupts across the community as the reality of the situation sets in. Local news stations scramble too, broadcast the terrifying details of a vulnerable elderly woman violently abducted from her own doorstep. The entire neighborhood is paralyzed by fear, wondering if a violent predator is hiding in their own backyards. The family is trapped in an agonizing limbo, terrified for her failing health and begging for any shred of information. They know her pacemaker requires precise monitoring, and her body requires specific daily medication. Every passing hour without those medical necessities drastically reduces her chances of survival. The local authorities are immediately thrust into the spotlight, facing immense pressure to lock down the neighborhood and hunt down the suspected kidnapper before it is too late. The scene should be treated as the most sensitive and restricted ground in the entire county. Detectives should be meticulously cataloging every blade of grass and every speck of dust on that porch. The perimeter should be fortified with an impenetrable wall of crime scene tape to preserve the fragile chain of custody for any future court trial. Everyone expects a massive, coordinated manhunt to unfold with textbook precision. But just as the community braces for a rigorous forensic lockdown, a completely bizarre and catastrophic decision is handed down from the very top of the local police department. Instead of securing the single most important location in the entire investigation, the authorities take a step that leaves seasoned investigators and legal experts absolutely speechless. The very ground where a violent struggle occurred is about to be compromised in the most unimaginable way possible. The date is February 4th. Exactly 3 days have passed since the 84-year-old victim was violently taken from her home. The critical window for finding a missing person alive is rapidly closing, and the investigative momentum should be at its absolute peak. But instead of tightening their grip on the crime scene, Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos authorizes an action that sends shockwaves through the true crime and legal communities. In a stunning display of systemic failure, the local police department abruptly removes the protective crime scene tape surrounding the residence. The dedulo, physical barrier, is completely stripped away, leaving the most critical location in the entire investigation entirely exposed to the elements and the public. The consequences are immediate and catastrophic. Journalists carrying heavy equipment, eager true crime enthusiasts, and curious neighbors freely wander onto the property. They trample over the very ground where a violent physical struggle took place just 72 hours prior. They walk across the porch where the victim's blood was discovered. They contaminate the walkways and the entry points with foreign DNA footprints and microscopic fibers. The fragile chain of custody, the absolute legal bedrock required to prosecute a suspected kidnapper in a court of law, is completely obliterated in a matter of hours. The house of a kidnapped woman whose life hangs by a thread is suddenly treated like a morbid public attraction. This unbelievable breach of protocol happens at the exact same time. A terrifying new development emerges in the case. A highly sophisticated digital ransom note demanding payment in Bitcoin is suddenly delivered to the local television station, KOLD-TV. The alleged perpetrators are actively communicating, establishing strict deadlines and threatening immediate harm if their cryptocurrency demands are not met. The investigation has officially escalated into a high-stakes federal hostage situation. Yet the primary physical crime scene is completely compromised. How can investigators cross-reference the digital threat with physical reality when the ground zero of the abduction has been trampled by dozens of completely uninvolved bystanders? Any biological material left by the masked suspect, any tiny drop of sweat or stray hair, is now hopelessly mixed with the genetic material of random civilians and camera crews. The local authorities effectively handed the defense attorney of any future suspect a massive gift wrapped reasonable doubt argument. A defense lawyer will simply argue that any evidence found at the house after February 4th was planted or contaminated by the unrestrained crowd. The sheer negligence of leaving a violent kidnapping scene unguarded, while an active Bitcoin ransom timeline is ticking down, is a misstep of monumental proportions. The biological evidence is ruined. The suspect is completely free and actively taunting the media. The family is watching in horror as the investigation appears to implode from the inside out due to inexplicable administrative decisions. Who will step in to save this rapidly deteriorating case before the ransom deadline expires and the victim is lost forever? The situation is spiraling completely out of control, and the local authorities have clearly demonstrated they cannot handle the magnitude of this sophisticated crime. Make sure you hit the notification bell right now, because the unbelievable twists in these botched investigations change by the minute, and you do not want to miss how this specific forensic disaster is eventually salvaged. The entire narrative is about to violently shift as a much more powerful entity realizes they must immediately intervene. Before the devastating contamination of the physical property completely derailed the local effort, investigators desperately clutched at the digital fragments captured in the hours before the system went totally dark. The doorbell camera may have been disconnected, but the data it transmitted in its final moments provides a chilling glimpse of the alleged predator. The recovered footage reveals a terrifying phantom emerging from the shadows. A male figure, heavily concealed behind a mask, steps onto the porch with deliberate and calculating movements. Analysts estimate his height to be somewhere between 5 feet 9 inches and 5 feet 10 inches. Slung over his shoulders is a distinct, dark-colored Ozark Trail brand hiker backpack, presumably carrying the tools necessary to dismantle the security grid, and perhaps something much more sinister. The footage captures the exact horrifying moment this masked suspect physically tampers with the camera lens, severing the digital lifeline to the outside world. He does not act panicked. He acts with the cold, mechanical precision of a professional who has rehearsed this exact sequence of events multiple times. This was not a crime of opportunity committed by a desperate individual wandering the streets. This was a targeted surgical strike. When federal analysts begin pulling the historical data from the surrounding neighborhood networks, they uncover an even more disturbing layer to the timeline. By meticulously cross-referencing neighborhood security feeds and automated license plate readers, they trace the phantom's digital footprint backward in time. The data reveals a highly suspicious and completely unexplained presence lurking near the victim's residence as far back as January 11th. This means the alleged attacker did not just randomly select this specific 84-year-old woman on a Sunday night. They had been actively stalking the property, silently monitoring her daily routines, and identifying the technical vulnerabilities of her home for nearly 3 full weeks before executing the rapid abduction. The predator spent 20 days watching her leave for family dinners, charting the exact times the garage door opened and closed, and noting the blind spots in the neighborhood illumination. They knew exactly when the street would be empty and exactly how long it would take to disable the alarms. The psychological terror of knowing someone was watching from the darkness for weeks adds a deeply sinister dimension to the ransom demands. It proves this operation was heavily financed, deeply organized, and executed with military-level discipline. But even the most disciplined criminals are still human, and humans make biological errors. While the local police department tragically allowed the exterior crime scene to be trampled into forensic oblivion, the initial sweep conducted in the very first hours of the investigation managed to secure one crucial piece of untainted evidence. Hidden among the chaos of the immediate aftermath and completely separate from the victim's own bloodstains, crime scene technicians isolated a microscopic anomaly. They discovered a single microscopic trace of unidentified genetic material left behind at the compromised residence. This tiny biological fragment is absolutely monumental. According to the laboratory analysis, the collected material definitively does not belong to the elderly victim. Furthermore, it does not match any of her family members or anyone known to be in her immediate social circle who might have innocently visited the house. This anonymous biological signature is the only pristine piece of physical evidence directly linking the phantom in the footage to the physical reality of the terrifying abduction. It is the ultimate forensic prize, resting in a sterile test tube, while the actual crime scene outside lies in absolute ruins. The discovery of this foreign genetic sequence shifts the entire focus of the manhunt. The investigators no longer have to rely solely on grainy night vision footage or untraceable cryptocurrency addresses. They have the actual biological blueprint of the person who stood on that porch. But possessing a biological blueprint is only the first step in a massive scientific journey. The genetic material must now be processed, categorized, and run through sprawling national databases in a desperate bid to attach a legal name to the masked phantom. The pressure is mounting exponentially as the ransom deadlines approach and the victim's medical condition rapidly deteriorates without her life-saving prescriptions. The entire weight of this high-stakes kidnapping now rests entirely on a microscopic strand of evidence that miraculously survived the catastrophic blunders of the local authorities. The race to decode that genetic sequence is the only hope left to find the missing woman before the digital countdown reaches zero. Every forensic analyst working the case understands the gravity of the situation. They know that if the databases fail to return an exact match, the trail will go completely cold and the perpetrators will vanish into the shadows permanently. As investigators scramble to find a solid lead in the contaminated wreckage of the initial response, a glimmer of hope materializes exactly 2 miles from the abduction site. Search teams combing the surrounding roadways discover a discarded black glove lying ominously in the dirt. It looks exactly like the kind of tactical gear a professional intruder might wear to avoid leaving. Fingerprints on a porch or a doorbell. The discovery sends a surge of adrenaline through the command center. Technicians rush the fabric to the laboratory, praying for a biological match to the anonymous profile recovered earlier. The entire community holds its breath, believing the elusive phantom has finally made a careless physical mistake. But the criminal justice system is famous for cruel illusions and devastating dead ends. When the Devon-encephalopathy laboratory results finally return the soaring hopes of the task force crash violently back to Earth. The microscopic skin cells trapped inside the dark fabric do not belong to a sophisticated kidnapper or a malicious stalker. The genetic signature is perfectly matched to a completely innocent employee who works at a nearby restaurant. The item was nothing more than forgotten winter clothing dropped by a civilian walking home from a late shift. It is a crushing red herring that wastes precious hours and diverts critical resources at the worst possible time. The false lead evaporates, leaving detectives staring at a blank wall. Meanwhile, an even darker psychological warfare is unfolding through encrypted digital channels. The terrifying messages delivered to the local television news desk continue to dictate aggressive financial terms, but something about the communication is fundamentally wrong. Extortion operates on a very specific set of psychological rules. The perpetrators must undeniably prove they hold the human asset in order to force the massive cryptocurrency payment. But as the clock ticks relentlessly past the first demanded deadline and then creeps past the second, a chilling reality sets in across the task force. The anonymous senders aggressively demand the digital money transfer, but they consistently fail to provide the one thing the desperate family is begging for: a concrete verification that the elderly captive is still breathing. There is no current photograph holding a daily newspaper. There is no audio recording of a terrified voice. There is absolutely zero proof of life. This agonizing and profound silence forces criminal profilers to drastically reconsider the entire motive of the brutal attack. Is this truly a financially motivated hostage situation, or is the digital ransom demand an elaborate theatrical production designed to completely misdirect the authorities? If the alleged attackers never intended to negotiate and never intended to release their captive, the encrypted messages are simply a malicious smokescreen, buying them enough time to vanish into the desert completely. The complete absence of verifiable contact transforms the investigation from a frantic rescue mission into a deeply paranoid waiting game. The community is watching a masterclass in psychological manipulation unfold in real time on their evening broadcasts. The local authorities are completely paralyzed by the conflicting signals, the ruined physical evidence, and the relentless public scrutiny. Every passing hour feels like a profound systemic failure of the agencies sworn to protect the vulnerable. The narrative is violently fracturing. The physical trail is freezing cold, and the digital trail is a labyrinth of encrypted lies. The pressure cooker is reaching a critical threshold, and the terrified public demands immediate accountability from their elected officials. The absolute silence from the alleged captors speaks volumes about their true intentions. They are playing a game of shadows, and the local police are losing every single round. The tension is unbearable, as the hours turn into days with no resolution in sight. The missing woman is running out of time, and the local force is running out of ideas. Their initial blunders have created a toxic environment where every new clue is treated with immense skepticism. The public trust is completely broken, and the family is left to suffer in a void of incompetence and unfulfilled promises. The local jurisdiction has proven itself entirely incapable of managing a threat of this magnitude. Is this a genuine extortion plot, executed by a highly organized syndicate, or a flawlessly executed cover-up designed to hide a much more personal and sinister motive? Drop your theories in the comments below, because the local authorities are completely out of their depth, and the next unprecedented move by the federal government changes the entire landscape of this terrifying mystery. The sheer magnitude of the procedural disaster finally triggers the ultimate bureaucratic nuclear option. The Federal Bureau of Investigation officially steps out of their polite advisory role and executes a complete and total takeover of the entire operation. This is an incredibly rare and aggressively humiliating maneuver that sends a crystal clear message to the nation. The local police force has entirely lost control of the narrative, the evidence, and the suspect. The federal agents do not merely offer polite assistance or suggest new strategies. They systematically and ruthlessly strip the local department of their jurisdictional authority over the most critical aspects of the hunt. They immediately shove the regional leadership and their bewildered deputies to the extreme sidelines, forcing them to watch as real professionals dismantle their flawed work. The reason for this drastic and unprecedented intervention directly traces back to the catastrophic decision to prematurely remove the protective barriers around the target residence. Elite federal prosecutors look at the trampled property and realize that any future court case is already in severe legal jeopardy. They understand with chilling clarity that a competent defense attorney will tear the local investigators apart on the witness stand for casually allowing a crowd of reporters to contaminate a violent struggle site. To save the prosecution and ensure a conviction is even possible, the federal agency must completely reboot the investigation from absolute scratch. Their first order of business is to aggressively re-establish a massive ironclad perimeter around the entire neighborhood. They lock down the streets with tactical military precision, replacing the casual local presence with stern, unforgiving federal authority. The message to the public and the press is absolute. The circus is officially over. Next, they deploy highly specialized federal teams to conduct grueling, methodical door-to-door interrogations. They are not just asking polite neighborly questions, they are demanding ironclad alibis, legally reviewing new surveillance angles, and treating every single resident as a potential witness or an unwitting accomplice. The federal accomplice, agents are frantically trying to reconstruct the shattered timeline and salvage whatever microscopic data might have miraculously survived the initial contamination phase. They are hunting for the elusive ghosts of the alleged perpetrators who slipped away into the night, while the local force was busy dismantling their own crime scene tape. The takeover is a profound and public embarrassment for the regional law enforcement leadership, but it provides a massive surge of relief for a family completely desperate for competent intervention. The federal resources instantly bring access to classified national databases, advanced satellite imaging capabilities, and the most sophisticated behavioral profiling units on the planet. They are treating the encrypted digital ransom notes not as simple empty threats, but as complex cryptographic puzzles waiting to be legally cracked. They trace the intricate routing protocols, analyze the specific psychological syntax of the written threats, and attempt to pierce the dark web anonymity of the cryptocurrency demands. The entire weight and focus of the United States government is now intensely concentrated on uncovering what truly happened on that single suburban block. This massive escalation completely and definitively answers the overarching question of why this specific local case required such an extreme federal mandate. It was not just because the underlying crime was exceptionally heinous or high profile. It was primarily because the initial response was so deeply procedurally flawed that it threatened to grant the suspects permanent legal immunity before an arrest was even made. The federal takeover is a desperate, highly calculated attempt to patch a rapidly sinking ship. The agents are racing against an invisible medical clock, armed with unparalleled forensic technology, and an absolute refusal to let a predator escape through a procedural loophole created by local incompetence. The stakes have never been higher, and the margin for error for the new investigative team is now officially zero. They are playing a high-stakes game of catch-up, desperately trying to reverse engineer a meticulously planned crime that was accidentally assisted by the very people supposed to prevent it. Every new federal interview, every meticulously reconstructed timeline, and every newly analyzed byte of data is a vital step toward correcting a monumental injustice. The shift in power is absolute undeniable, and the hunt is finally being conducted with the lethal seriousness it always demanded. The suspects are no longer dealing with amateurs. The full force of federal justice is now hunting them down, with the federal government now firmly steering the massive investigative apparatus. The frantic, chaotic energy begins to stabilize into a cold, calculated, and purely scientific pursuit. The physical boots on the ground continue to canvass the neighborhood, but the true primary battleground has shifted entirely from the suburban streets to a sterile, brightly lit federal laboratory. The single isolated fragment of unidentified biological material, miraculously recovered before the scene was horribly compromised, is now the undisputed centerpiece of the entire operation. Federal scientists carefully and methodically prepare the precious sample for an advanced complex process known as genetic genealogy. This cutting-edge forensic technique completely bypasses traditional limited criminal databases. Instead, it searches sprawling, massive public ancestry records, hoping to find a distant cousin, a forgotten uncle, or any shared bloodline that can point investigators directly toward the masked suspect. It is a meticulous, agonizingly slow, and highly complex mathematical procedure, but it is incredibly effective at unmasking individuals who arrogantly believe they have left absolutely no trace behind. While the supercomputers relentlessly churn through millions of ancestral data points, the agents issue a highly targeted and deeply desperate plea to the general public. They are no longer asking for vague general tips about suspicious vehicles or strange noises on the actual night of the brutal abduction. Instead, they are laser-focused on a completely different and much earlier date. They publicly beg the surrounding community to aggressively scour their digital hard drives, their vehicle dash cameras, and their personal cloud archives for any stray footage recorded exactly 3 weeks prior to the terrible incident. They desperately need the public to help them identify the shadowy phantom who was silently casing the public neighborhood, observing the daily routines and plotting the absolute perfect moment to execute the strike. This hyper-specific public request highlights a deeply terrifying psychological reality: the calculated price. Predator was calmly hiding in plain sight, studying his prey long before the violent crime ever occurred. The family, utterly exhausted and totally shattered by the relentless emotional roller coaster, clings desperately to this promising new scientific direction. They painfully understand that the initial local blunders cost them crucial, irreplaceable time, but the overwhelming federal resources finally offer a genuine, tangible ray of hope. The previous digital ransom deadlines have completely passed into total irrelevance, entirely overshadowed by the silent, methodical, and brilliant work of the federal forensic genealogists. The entire sprawling narrative of this terrifying case now precariously balances on the microscopic edge of a single biological helix. Will the massive familial DNA databases successfully provide the ultimate missing link, or will the isolated genetic profile tragically remain a permanent orphan, locked in the federal system forever? The final resolution of this agonizing mystery does not rely on a dramatic high-speed tactical chase or a tense screaming armed standoff. It entirely relies on a high-speed laboratory centrifuge and the quiet, steady hum of a government server analyzing thousands of complex genetic markers. The entire true crime world is watching and anxiously waiting for advanced science to finally answer the ultimate central question. Who confidently walked onto that quiet porch and violently severed the fragile digital lifeline of an innocent elderly woman? The federal authorities possess the exact biological blueprint of the alleged monster, but they still do not have a legal name. The final piece of the puzzle remains agonizingly out of reach, hidden within a maze of genetic code. The anticipation builds with every passing day as the laboratory works around the clock to refine the ancestral matches. Investigators know that generating a family tree is just the beginning of the hunt. Once a distant relative is identified, detectives must covertly build a suspect profile entirely backward, carefully eliminating innocent family members until only one logical target remains. This requires extreme patience and absolute secrecy to prevent the true perpetrator from fleeing the jurisdiction before the trap is fully set. The biological clock of the victim may have been violently interrupted, but the scientific clock of justice is now ticking louder than ever. The answers are buried in the blood, and it is only a matter of time before the science reveals the terrifying truth. What this case teaches us about systemic breakdown is profoundly disturbing and highly educational for anyone studying modern criminal justice. From a strictly analytical perspective, this complex investigation serves as a terrifying masterclass in two distinct societal vulnerabilities. First, it brutally exposes the critical difference between perceived hardware presence and actual secure data retention. A physical smart camera mounted on a wall is merely a psychological deterrent. Without automatic off-site retention, the expensive device is entirely useless against a prepared perpetrator who simply understands basic physical networking. The digital footprint must survive longer than the physical hardware, or the entire home security system is completely worthless. Second, and far more importantly, this disastrous scenario highlights the absolute legal sanctity of the chain of custody. When sworn law enforcement officers fail to protect a vulnerable location, they actively and unwittingly become the absolute greatest asset to the criminal defense team. Unnecessarily contaminating a sensitive area permanently destroys the legal integrity of any biological material found subsequently. The sheer failure to maintain a strict, unyielding perimeter does not just ruin a single isolated clue, it completely jeopardizes the entire federal prosecution strategy by introducing massive, undeniable, reasonable doubt into the courtroom. This specific case overwhelmingly proves that sometimes the most dangerous threat to justice is not the cunning intellect of the alleged criminal, but the procedural negligence of the justice system itself. We must constantly demand rigorous, uncompromising adherence to basic protocol, because a casually broken system always provides a perfect legal sanctuary for those who wish to do us harm. Understanding these dual failures is absolutely essential for community safety. Protecting our homes requires redundant digital backups, and protecting our courts requires flawless police work. When either fails, the predator ultimately wins. An innocent elderly woman stripped of her vital life-saving medication vanishes completely into the void. An invisible kidnapper seemingly executes the absolute perfect digital blackout, and a thoroughly shattered investigation is painstakingly rebuilt from the ground up by relentless federal authorities. The terrifying reality of this brutal abduction leaves us with a deeply unsettling question as the laboratory computers finally conclude their complex genetic search. If the ancestral DNA results ultimately point directly to someone the grieving family already knows and implicitly trusts, will this case instantly transform from a random act of violent extortion into a horrifying story of ultimate intimate betrayal? The absolute most dangerous monsters are rarely masked strangers hiding in the bushes. They are very often the people sitting casually across from us at the Sunday dinner table, until the federal agents finally secure a legal indictment and the final laboratory report is completely unsealed. This chilling file remains entirely open. Thank you for walking through this dark labyrinth with Crime Files with Liam. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and join us next week as we unlock another twisted vault of deception. Stay safe out there, and always remember to keep questioning absolutely everything around you.